But in the studio, it's warm and inviting. Emma Wolfe and Katrina are here with us today. We're going to discuss the papers because we were discussing, weren't we, how we're fearing the end of summer, heading into autumn. And it seems this August period, this recess, has been such a huge political heavyweight time for everyone, for politicians, for voters too, in particular asylum hotels and the protests, Katrina, around the asylum hotels. This is in The Guardian, and it's all about the ban that was on, you know, it was the 12th of September, I think, that the Epping Hotel was meant to close. An injunction on an injunction that will then see a final court case in October, Katrina. But this story in The Guardian really highlighting the legality around what we've seen and how it sparked protests.
Yes, and this is the story of the papers today. All of the papers are covering this. The Guardian is taking a slightly different approach to it, as you might expect, and they're going through the ins and outs of the legislation and the ban and what the judges are saying. So this is that the Court of Appeal has overturned the injunction on housing asylum seekers in the Bell Hotel in Epping, and that might seem like a success for the Home Office. Actually, it is still very difficult because despite this win, other councils, as is reflected in The Guardian, are saying that they plan to take legal action as well. But The Guardian is looking at some of the language from the judgment and saying that the initial decision, the initial injunction was seriously flawed. It had errors in principle. And there's an interesting line from the judges talking about if I'm going to just read it out. If even unlawful protests are to be treated as relevant, then there is a risk of encouraging further lawlessness. So there were real concerns about should this injunction go ahead, what would happen to the 138 people who were living in the hotel, where would they go, and would this just spark further unrest? And when they were weighing up the balance of what was in the public interest, they decided that it was in the public interest to allow the asylum seekers to stay in this hotel. But of course, as we're seeing in the other pages of the other papers, this is having ramifications with regards to just ramping up the heat of the debate.
Yeah, Emma, the council's leader, it's Chris Whitbread, he's called for calm from local communities.
Yeah, you can understand why the judge didn't want this to become a kind of a reason for more local protests to be fomented and then more councils to appeal. But there is also a slightly different point, which was the beginning of the process, which was a temporary injunction being granted on the basis of planning law and being granted on the basis of a change of use from a hotel that was very, very underoccupied, I think about 1% occupancy at the Bell, to housing a permanent home for 138 asylum seekers, and that was the basis on which the injunction was granted. So I think we have to also reflect that it hasn't been a summer of... There's been a lot of protest, but fortunately we haven't had... You know, many of us feared that it was going to become a little bit like sort of the Southport, the Southport incident, the tragedy there that sparked off riots and real violence and harm to people. So far, there's been a lot of protests, there's been a lot of unrest, but more talk of it than actual unrest. You know, local communities have come out, and there's been a lot of women, you know, we should remember that there's women, the ladies in pink, talking about not feeling safe in their local communities.
Yeah, and this speaks to an article in The Sun, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Today, you've let down women and children. What about our rights? And this is mothers venting their fury over that judgment also.
Absolutely, and we saw a lot of women as well talking about their rights and the safety of women in their communities outside the Britannia in Canary Wharf and outside the Thistle Hotel in Clerkenwell in London. So it's been all around the country, in fact. And then, of course, you have you have the protests being sort of taken over or changed. The nature of them has been changed by far-right people, but far-right protesters coming along and changing the sort of tenor of it all. And Nigel Farage for Reform saying that this judgment means illegal migrants have more rights than the British, which is quite strong stuff. He's saying the government have used the ECHR against the people of Epping. So there are so many sides to this, and I think what's missing is a sense of direction from the government, a sense of what is the plan, what is the actual policy? We understand they're saying they want to end the use of asylum hotels, but they want to do it in an orderly manner, which is why the Home Office appealed this temporary injunction. But we do need to hear from them now. What is the plan? Where are people going to be moved to?
And that speaks to the government, really, doesn't it, Katrina? Because it's a win, albeit very short, because the political headache that they'll now face once they return from recess on Monday will be a huge challenge.
And one of the ironies of this situation is that this issue really should be a uniting issue, because ultimately, left and right, everybody wants the same outcomes. Nobody wants people arriving by small boats, the right because they don't want asylum seekers coming here, but the left because it's a really dangerous way to travel and people are dying. Nobody wants asylum seekers to be housed in hotels because it's a really inefficient way of housing people. It's a huge strain on the public purse. The environment is not particularly good for people. They're being to live on. The conditions are not good. So nobody wants this. It's just the method of getting to a place where numbers are down, where the processing systems are sped up. It's about resources. And again, as Emma says, it's about Keir Starmer having a very clear plan, because if he doesn't show leadership on this, Nigel Farage is moving very quickly on this. Keir Starmer is feeling like he has to tack to the right to try and counter that, when actually what we need is just reasoned, nuanced, calm debate. And telling people that they're losing their rights because of this, it's not helpful. I think you can have a lot of sympathy for people who feel intimidated in their communities, who have concerns about their communities, but there is so much misinformation about this that absolutely needs to be tackled, and it needs to be tackled from the top down.
OK, let's move on now. A story in a couple of the papers about Angela Rayner and some stamp duty. Another headache in a different way, Katrina, for the government as they come back. They'll have a long list, won't they, a to-do list, essentially.
All the papers.
In all the papers. Angela Rayner is appearing in all the papers today. This is another story that is absolutely everywhere, but the I-paper is taking, like The Guardian on asylum, the I-paper, as you would expect, is taking a slightly different tack and is being a little bit more in defence of Angela Rayner. Their introduction to the story is that she did nothing wrong, and this is a question about properties that she owns. Did she pay the correct tax? How many properties does she own? The answer to that is 1. She has bought herself a seaside apartment that is agitating people. She has a Grace and Favour apartment that she doesn't own, that she doesn't pay council tax on, but that is just convention. Lots of ministers over the years have lived in Grace and Favour council tax-free apartments. And one of the questions is about her main residence, her family home, which now would seem to be in her husband's name. She hasn't done anything wrong. She has paid the correct amounts as far as we can see it, but it is well, it's become a stick to beat her with.
It's interesting, isn't it, because people want politicians to be transparent, and while we're not saying Angela Rayner's done anything wrong from what we see, being direct, coming out and putting the facts directly from the horse's mouth, as you would say, would be the move perhaps people might be suggesting behind the
It does. I think it's perfectly valid to ask these questions. I'm not saying she's done anything wrong, but I don't think equally, Katrina, you can say she hasn't done anything wrong. We don't know yet. There is an investigation into this issue. She has paid a certain amount of stamp duty on her new luxury beachfront apartment in Hove. But the question is, if you declare that as your... Would you or I be able to I won't say get away with. Would you or I be able to do this? She does seem to have moved, taken her name off the deeds of the family home, the constituency home in Greater Manchester. You say she doesn't own that, so now her husband owns it. There's a certain amount of moving things around, and many of the papers, not a few, many of the papers are calling this sleaze. Is this sleaze? Is this a tax dodge? I think it's valid also to hold our high-profile, our frontline politicians. She's the Deputy Prime Minister. She's the Housing and Communities Minister. I think it's fair enough to hold them to a standard when they are being... A lot of their residents, a lot of their accommodation and their living expenses are paid for by us. Her Grace and Favour apartment, where she lives in the week in London, is funded by the tax. I do think it's valid that we hold them to, whether it's transparency or a higher moral standard, because there are valid questions here to be answered, and it's all getting rather murky.
Oh, she's been described as having a property portfolio. She owns one property. I think for the Conservatives to point a finger at this. One, the whole property. She doesn't own the other one. Her ex-husband.
So she doesn't own her constituency home. That's very strange, isn't it?
Perhaps she'll buy another constituency home and then she'll be 4 pads.
But do you see how strange that is, that you don't own you don't live, you suddenly take your name off a family home where you have lived?
I think for the Conservatives to start pointing the finger at this when there are so many landlords in the Conservative Party, and when
whataboutery, here we go.
Money sections explaining how you can avoid paying.
She knows the rules.
Taxes.
She knows the rules. She's the housing and community. Let's see.
We'll leave it there. Thank you for your company, Emma, Katrina. Really appreciate that.